Welcome everyone. Thrilled to have Melanie from Anomalo here today. We're going to be chatting about how Slack is redefining kind of customer engagement and customer collaboration. Thrilled to have you here, Melanie. Thrilled to learn about what y'all are doing and in particular some of the workflows that you guys have and the results that you've seen. For those that don't know me, I'm Mike Molinet, one of the co-founders of Thena. Thena is a application that sits in Slack and Teams to help you manage your customer requests and customer shared channels. And so we're going to be doing a deep dive with Melanie today from Anomalo to learn more about how you guys engage with your customers. So would love to just start, Melanie, if you can, with a brief intro of yourself, your background, your role, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here. So I'm Melanie Veale. I am a data solutions architect at Anomalo. And so that's our sort of customer success title for the kind of end user facing technical kind of advisory role. So my original background, as we were alluding to, is in astrophysics. I got a PhD in astrophysics at Berkeley. And then I've spent the last 5 years or so in the tech industry in kind of customer success, like field, technical roles in the data and analytics world. So before Anomalo, I worked at a company called Domino Data Lab. It's a data science platform. And now at Anomalo, Anomalo is a data quality monitoring platform. And so what that means is that we basically want our customers to have confidence in their data. We are kind of the leading enterprise data quality monitoring solution. So we are focusing on the large enterprise customers. And you'll hear data observability as a buzzword a lot, but we try to go beyond that into actually looking at the contents of the data and using kind of unsupervised machine learning and time series modeling to alert you when something has gone wrong with the data. So my role as a data solutions architect is basically to interface with our end users at these enterprises and kind of go deep on their data, the structure of their data, exactly what sorts of things are important to monitor about that data, and suggest configurations and customizations and alerts that will sort of give them exactly the coverage they need without a lot of false positive noise. So yeah, that's the data solutions architect is what we've called that.
Very cool. How long has the company been around? Let's start there, just for context.
The company itself has been around a few years. It's pretty new, between Series A and B right now. I've been with Anomalo for about 6 months, so I've not been there since the beginning. I'm the second data solutions architect on our team.
Awesome. And you mentioned kind of working with large enterprises. Who typically on the other side, on the customer side, are you interacting with? What types of roles are you typically seeing there?
Yeah, so for the large enterprises, there's usually some kind of data governance structure or function that we interact with. But my sort of favorite user interactions, like we actually get a variety of people as actual users of our platform, which I think is one of the selling points of it. We'll get people in more of a data engineering role. They're usually concerned with making sure the data is actually flowing. And then we will actually get people in sort of data science and analytics functions oftentimes who are the consumers of that data, also invested in sort of deciding, okay, what important assumptions do they make about the data that they want to ensure are true.
Okay, cool. So tell us about like your day to day when you're interacting with customers, just in the context of collaborating with customers, because especially in technical, in largely technical type technologies, we find, or I tend to see that collaboration, that kind of close communication and relationship tends to be very beneficial. How do you guys think about that? How do you guys tend to collaborate with customers? And just want to start there in terms of that piece.
Sure, yeah. So we usually try to have a pretty sort of white glove like onboarding process for the users because data is such a complex thing. I will usually come in for some live sessions with small groups of users, maybe sort of a team at a time, to introduce them to the platform. For the really, really large customers, there's usually some kind of team that's kind of piloting this new thing. And so we're going to work out with them how to integrate it best with their particular data warehouse. But there's a lot of asynchronous stuff that happens in Slack, as you would guess, based on me being here at the webinar, sort of after those initial sessions where users will have a particular use case, or we've discussed something in office hours, they've tried it out, and maybe they get an error, trying out something specific, and we help them through it, or maybe they just have a question about a best practice that kind of follows on from what we discussed live. So we do sort of that combination of trying to get face-to-face with them, but then there's definitely a very long tail for us of kind of individual use cases or individual issues or questions that they come up with afterwards. And so the Slack threads on those can get pretty long, honestly.
How long do you guys typically do an implementation process? Like, how long does implementation usually take? Do you guys do pilots with customers before you sign, or is it typically they sign and then you do implementation? Tell us a little bit about that kind of initial phase of the relationship.
Yeah, so most of the time we do a pilot, especially for the larger customers. There's almost always a pilot. Occasionally, and this is kind of for the customers that are smaller on our scale, sometimes they will sign without a pilot, and so we start from scratch on the implementation. But there's a sort of counterpart on the more infrastructure side of mine, the sort of customer success engineer who will take care of initial implementation of just like installing, the Anomalo app. Because we offer a SaaS option, but a lot of these enterprise customers want it sort of on-prem essentially, or in their cloud. And so there is usually kind of that two-phase implementation where we'll do kind of the back-end infrastructure setup. Even if we do a pilot, oftentimes we will kind of redo that part into a more production-ready configuration. And then implementation phase 2 is where I come in to kind of get the end users onto that infrastructure.
Oh, interesting. And then you're doing, I'd imagine, so additional implementation, also enablement, it sounds like training and helping people just get more value out of the platform.
Exactly. Yeah. Sort of when I come in, we're phrasing that as, I don't know, implementation is kind of the infra side, and then we phrase it as that enablement and kind of training phase.
Okay, cool. In terms of engaging with customers, live calls, obviously, you mentioned Slack. What are the different channels that you guys might be engaging with on a day-to-day basis? Are you guys using email? If so, how heavily? And any other channels that you guys find that you're interacting with customers in?
Yeah, for sure. So Slack is the main one, and we try to push people there as much as possible because that's kind of where we live all day. We definitely do have, especially among the larger enterprise customers, some that are just not willing to connect. Like they may not use Slack at all, in which case, sometimes they're using Teams. And so we've got a couple customers where we're thinking of, trying to get into shared team spaces with them. But sometimes they will also not be comfortable with having any kind of linkage there. And so those are the customers that we use email with kind of after, the initial live calls. And so, yeah, we've got a split basically between sort of email-based customers and then Slack-based customers are kind of the main two categories.
Now, you mentioned you've been at Anomalo for about 6 months, and coming from a previous company into Anomalo, where the team had already been using Slack with customers pretty extensively, it seemed. What was that like coming into that situation, and any initial like thoughts or observations that you had kind of seeing that for the first time?
Yeah. So, I mean, working at sort of the previous company for long enough, and we used Slack extensively internally there, I was like, oh, I'm used to Slack being chaotic. It's totally fine. And then after a couple weeks at Anomalo, I was like, okay, I have to admit, like the different channels where we have like an external channel and an internal channel, both with most of our customers, is kind of overwhelming. The sort of just number of different channels there were required me to kind of up my organization game of, grouping them, doing things in Slack to kind of tame the craziness a little bit.
So tell us a little bit more about that kind of before, and then as you guys started to use Thena kind of middle of the year, want to then switch into what's that been like and how you're using Thena afterwards. But tell us a little bit more about that before and some of the challenges you ran into, which are probably going to be common challenges that people see.
Yeah, of course. So I sort of considered myself a expert user of the, reminder feature in Slack. Read a message. If this is something I'm going to have to think about for a minute, I don't want to just mark it unread, because then that little red dot is going to drive me crazy. But I also don't want to forget about it. And so, having Slack remind me about this in some amount of time, hopefully by then, maybe I'll have space to think about it and actually give an answer. The sort of sheer number of small to medium-sized customer questions that came in over Slack kind of made that untenable, right? Like I would, even if I try to predict, like, all right, I'm going to have time at 4 p.m. today to like clear out all my Slack stuff. And so then I spend all day saying, snooze this until 4 p.m., snooze this until 4 p.m. 4 p.m. comes around and then Slack suddenly dumps a list onto me. That is not really tenable as we kind of scale and grow in our number of customer interactions. So I can then jump into the Thena part.
Yeah, so then you guys started using Thena kind of, earlier this year after you joined. Tell us a little bit about how maybe just start how you're using Thena, and then we can dive into some of the benefits that you've seen so far.
Yeah, for sure. So we have Thena plugged into basically all of our external facing customer channels. And so it will, detect if a customer posts something as a question or an issue of some kind. And we already had the sort of 2-channel structure where we had one external facing one with the customer and then one purely internal one where we could kind of chat about their questions. And so that was a perfect match for kind of the Thena implementation. I think was very straightforward. We plug it into each of the customer channels, and then when Thena notices, a message, a request, a question come in, it makes a post in the internal channel to say, hey, this customer has a question. And then I think the sort of big part that's useful for me is the Thena interface itself, the web Kanban, where it lists out all of the requests that have come in from various customers across all of the channels.
Can you share a little bit about kind of what that is, how you use it, and the value that you see in that for the folks that maybe haven't been familiar with the web view?
Yeah, for sure. So the main thing for sort of the Thena Kanban board for me is that it will sort of put an entry in for each customer, question or issue that has come in for each thread. And instead of kind of doing that Slack, remind me about this dance, I can just sort of trust that like Thena has noticed each post that has happened. And then when I have, half an hour to knock out a few questions from customers, I can just look at the Kanban and I'll see, sort of standard Kanban, like things that are to do or that have not been touched yet. I can look at all of those and see any messages that I might have, glanced over as I was going through Slack, but not really read. And then for any of the ones that are appropriate for me to answer, I can sort of click through from there to Slack, give them some kind of answer. And it allows me to also track, not just things that are sort of officially assigned to me, like once I've assigned it to myself in Thena or responded on it and Thena's automatically said, okay, this is Melanie's, I can just filter down to only those. And so then the second kind of follow-up layer where if I've answered their question, but I'm not sure it, fully satisfies what they need, or maybe I had a follow-up question for them. There's that nice Kanban structure of things that are kind of waiting or on hold in some form to make sure that everything is resolved before we mark it as sort of closed and their question is answered or their issue is solved.
Fascinating. Do you use the filters to first look at your view of what are all the things assigned to me, and then use filters in other ways, maybe to look at all the requests or maybe filter down in other ways?
Yeah, my flow is usually to start off with nothing filtered so that I can just look at the stuff that hasn't been touched yet at all. And then I'll sort of, look at those and say, okay, which ones are the ones that I'm gonna engage on? And so I'll assign those to myself. One other actually big benefit of that, like I've been talking about just sort of my personal flow for looking at things, but that way anyone else on the team, if they're doing the same exercise, like they won't see those as unassigned anymore. They'll know, okay, Melanie's looking at it, even if there's no response in Slack yet, like they know that I'm intending to respond. And so, yeah, that's kind of usually the first step. After that, I usually have everything filtered to just my threads that are sort of assigned to me in Thena. And for the bigger customers, I will often add sort of filter to one customer at a time. Like as I'm saying, all right, I'm going to work on, the 8 questions from big customer X today. then I'll filter to just them. There's other combinations that are really useful. Like I said, there's sort of my counterpart on the infrastructure side who will also be answering questions at the same customers. But it's often useful, I think, for us to kind of, cross collaborate a little bit. And sometimes there's overlap, in issues that might kind of cross between our domains. So I will look at just customers that have me assigned as their sort of solutions architect. And then I will be able to see, are there threads that the CSM has answered? Are there threads that the infrastructure person has answered that are relevant to me? So I think those are the main combinations of filters that I'll use.
Very cool. Do you guys use the internal kind of triage channel or alerts channel and the thread that Thena creates to actually collaborate on any of those threads when you guys are discussing internally, or do you do it in the actual just internal customer channel?
Yeah, we definitely use the Thena sort of triage message. We try to have, since we're such a Slack forward company, like we don't email each other internally ever, right? We do everything in Slack. And so we try to have pretty good discipline about threads and all of that. So that structure is great of having, a message from Thena say this customer has a question. And then for that, and we don't use it for all the messages. Sometimes they're just straightforward, I'll just answer the customer and that's it. But for those ones where it maybe crosses between me and, Joe, my sort of infra counterpart, we will chat with each other there, because we also have sort of internally a very transparent culture. We try to avoid DMing each other a lot. And so Joe and I will, say, okay, hey, do you know what's going on with maybe this part of this error? Do you want to respond? Do you want me to respond? All of that goes on in a thread on the internal triage message from Thena.
Very nice. Yeah, that's nice visibility. And I'm not sure, I'd be curious if you guys have used this yet, but the AI summary of both the external thread that gets really long, but then also there's an AI summary of the internal thread. Have you seen that? And have you guys used that at all to some kind of see the summary of what's going on?
I've noticed it. I don't usually, I guess, use it too much for anything other than just kind of recognizing kind of which thing is which, right? If I know that there's some dangling issue from last week, right? Maybe my memory has faded a little bit. Those are really helpful for me to just open a thing and say, is this the right one? Like, did I find the right thread? And so it's very useful for that. But usually I spend about half a second there and then I click through and kind of read the whole thread again.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And then, okay, so use the web view to really triage, to filter down, to figure out what things you want to tackle, and then maybe take a look at some other things that others are doing. And then inside of Slack, you'll just reply to customers. Let's talk about where Zendesk currently fits in terms of ticket creation. And I think I saw a question come in from Hans, which is, let's say something can't be solved within customer success or the data solutions architects, and you want to get it into a different system. Let's start with Zendesk, and then we can dive into from there what happens if it needs to go to the product team or the engineering team.
Yeah, for sure. So our main use of Zendesk is just for the email-based customers, as kind of, the way to get the visibility and the tracking of their requests. So we've actually rolled that out more recently than Thena, but we've got a pretty decent system now where instead of just emailing sort of me as an individual, they will actually email support at Anomalo. And so that's sort of our replacement. For the most part, we'll have the threads in Zendesk with the email customers, and then sort of, Thena we use for the Slack customers. The place where those join together is actually exactly this next question about when we escalate to product or engineering. Because one of the nice things about Zendesk is that if we have one internal sort of channel where we can escalate issues to product and engineering across all the customers. And so that's the channel where our engineering team lives, right? Like they don't have to join all of the billion customer channels. And so in Zendesk, once we have kind of established in a thread there that we need some kind of engineering ticket, you can link that ticket. We use Linear as opposed to Jira, but you can link that ticket in Zendesk. And then Zendesk kind of automatically emails you anytime there's updates on the ticket. And so the currently the one way that we have Thena and Zendesk intertwined is your capability to sort of create a Zendesk ticket will then let us link to the linear in the same way as we do for our email customers. And so then we've got kind of Zendesk to our linear system is the one linkage between kind of the CS arena and the engineering arena.
Yep. Cool. And so for those that aren't familiar, being able to take a Slack message or a Slack thread and being able to via Thena convert it into a Zendesk ticket, which can go back and forth, and then also adding the capability, which you guys will be able to use soon, is similar to the linking of a linear ticket. You'll be able to do that directly on a Thena thread. And then even if something never ends up in Zendesk, but it has a linear ticket, you'll be able to connect it and kind of get updates in that thread based on the status changes that happen in linear. So, which tends to be a common flow that I think a lot of people are utilizing nowadays.
Yeah, I think we're very excited about that, because then we sort of keep those domains separate of the email customers and the Slack customers, and we don't have to kind of cross them. And yeah, I noticed there was part of that question that said, if when we're escalating things to kind of the product team, or I was also interpreting engineering team, what percentage of questions escalating feels like it's healthy. Yeah, so before that sort of actual linear ticket linkage, I sort of skipped to the end of this escalation process. But before we do that, we will definitely take, especially for the Slack customers, like we'll take that customer thread and we do link directly to it in the channel where product and engineering lives, so that they can get like the full context, right? They can kind of temporarily join the channel if they want, see all the direct communications there. I think, right, the percentage that we escalate sort of in that way, like to the kind of engineering channel, is like, I don't know, maybe 10% or so. Feels like it's reasonably healthy to me. There's other times where we won't necessarily escalate an issue or a question, but we'll just sort of repost it for visibility. Like, all right, this is, need feedback, or this is a good example of feature X working really well. So I think in total, it's maybe a bit higher. But things where, there's something that qualifies as a question or an issue that we can't answer or solve. There's a decent number of those. Who knows if 10% is accurate, but something in that ballpark.
It sounds similar to a lot of companies that we work with in terms of that 10, 15, maybe 20% on the high end. It seems like you mentioned being a very open and transparent company, and it seems like Slack enables you guys to internally, especially collaborate very effectively, where you don't have that kind of siloed data loss where customer has something that maybe happens, which is separate from any conversation that you might be having with product and eng. It seems like by using Slack, you're able to kind of seamlessly get the context, share the context, jump back and forth. Tell us a little bit about the impact and the value that you see there in terms of using Slack just in general for solving and collaborating on customer issues internally.
Yeah, I think, that transparency part is key. And having kind of the structure of individual sort of customer channels, plus kind of central places where we as customer success can collaborate with engineering is important. Because, transparency is sort of a good thing. You can get all the context you need, but then the flip side of that is having too much noise, right? Like, I think we were sort of establishing this central engineering escalation process as I was joining. Because in the old days, right, there were fewer engineers, fewer customer success people, fewer customers. And so many of the engineers were just in all of the customer channels. And, they got the instant view of what's going on with all of the customers. But as we're scaling, that's obviously just not tenable, like for every engineer to be seeing everything that's happening with every customer. So yeah, having that little bit of kind of channel discipline and deciding, okay, where will different concerns live, I think lets people opt in, like when something is of interest to them, right? They have the breadcrumbs to be able to follow it to the source and kind of see the full thread history, between, say, me and a customer user. but they don't have to, it's not sort of disrupting them like on a daily basis. And then even sort of among customer success, right? Like sort of me and then the other data solutions architect, we will sort of divide up customers, and then, try to use a little bit of Slack discipline to make it so that, all right, my customers, like I'm seeing every message that comes in, maybe I'm not actually reading every message in the other channels for the other person's customers.
I think that's a really interesting insight because as companies grow, and I wanted to dive into this a little bit, as companies grow, they start in the early days, maybe seed stage, maybe early series A, where everyone might be in every channel, including engineering and product. And then you get to a point where you have enough customer channels where engineering and product doesn't want to be in every channel, but maybe all of go-to-market, all of data solutions architects, all of CSMs, all of account managers, they might be in all of them. And you also then get to a point where you're like, that's too many. And I think one of the things that is currently helping you guys right now is product and engineering don't need to be in those channels with customers, but you can get the triage and get the escalation to them for that discussion. But then also, I think one of the valuable things that I see as companies grow is the customer facing teams don't need to be in all the channels. And so you may find a period where you're not in some customer channels. You can still get visibility. You can still get visibility in the alerts channel, the triage channel, and then also the web view. You can actually see, and you touched on this a little bit earlier. Love to hear your thoughts on this, but the ability to kind of see what's going on, see the requests and tickets that are coming in, but without needing to be in those channels and how that enables you scale. I'm curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, for sure. We're at this stage, I am still in every channel, but I definitely have my notification settings tweaked so that some I'm essentially muting and sort of ignoring. But kind of the one big practical case where we need that kind of cross visibility is right, like the other data solutions architect or myself will go on vacation. And so when that happens, right, like we'll have a bit of a handoff meeting kind of between us. But rather than having to like list out and like, I don't know, maybe give a big doc with like links to specific Slack threads on what's going on, we can just say, okay, customer X has one question that I'm still waiting for them to answer, before we can follow up. So can you watch that thread? Like things like that are made way smoother because, we can sort of pick and choose, depending on the situation. Like maybe if one of us is just a little bit overloaded, we will sort of reassign in Thena, one to the other. Like, hey, can you help this person with this question? Because I know you had a similar one last week. And then if we just kind of go on vacation, we'll usually leave everything as is in Thena, but I can just sort of I check on sort of things filtered to me. I check on things filtered to, my coworker afterwards, and say, okay, now I'm taking care of, all of their stuff while they're on vacation. And, likewise, when I go on vacation, they can just check on all of my stuff in Thena without us having to do anything in prep for that handoff.
I think that's such an interesting insight because historically, pre-Thena, if things would happen in threads, customer would ask a question, somebody would start working on it. It was still kind of in motion, but hadn't been resolved. And then if they're out on, for example, vacation, nobody would know that even existed. And it would just be a thread that maybe the customer would ping on there, but they wouldn't even know to kind of send anything outside that thread. And now you actually have that visibility, everything that's assigned to Lucy or whoever else, and you're able to go in and see, show me everything that's assigned to Lucy while she's out, so that I can make sure that all of those are kind of making good motion and nothing needs any attention.
Right, exactly, because they might ping, the person that's out saying like, hey, here's my answer to your question, so now what? And they'll have, you'd have to kind of go through and warn every person you're interacting with that you're about to be out and who to contact instead, in sort of the old way. But now they can do that, and it won't be a problem because I'll be able to see it and kind of know that it's there.
It's really interesting. It reminds me of a conversation that I had earlier in the week, which is I was chatting with a manager who isn't in all the channels. They have, call it let's say about 100 channels, and they're in about half of them. And they didn't even have visibility into the other channels and what's happening in them, but they had a couple CSMs that were out all at the same time. And so they started to see those alerts, and they could see actually what wasn't getting addressed. That actually, which was a surprise to them, because they didn't even know some of these channels existed, but then they saw it, and then they were able to jump in and help get those resolved or tag somebody else in. And so I think that visibility, that tracking can help people not need to be in every channel, but when they need to pay attention to something, help get them attention, which it sounds like you guys are doing very effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I think we haven't crossed that line to us not being in every channel yet, but yeah, like I was saying with the notifications, it's effectively the same thing. Like there are some channels that I ignore unless I know that I have a reason not to, and I can go look at Thena.
Love it. Love it. Hans asked a great question, which I think ties into this. So I'll loop it in, which is, can you share how the frontline triage is handled for incoming requests? Do you guys have a CS rotation? Is it by account team? How do you guys handle that today?
Yeah, it's mostly by account team. But the sort of main difference between, I suppose there's kind of really three, people who might answer. There's sort of the CSM, there's me, and then there's sort of the more infra side technical person. I should say the CSM, or me or my counterpart, right, depending on which customer. And so for the most part, it'll be kind of obvious in the question, who it's for, right? Like if it says like, hey, can we move our regular sync, right? Like I assume that the CSM will answer. But it helps to have that assignment process in Thena. Like I will definitely sort of look at it and say like, if it's going to be one that I answer later, I will hit the button that says I'm looking into it, just so that, like Lucy, for example, or someone else can say, oh, Melanie does intend to answer this. And then, yeah, as far as sort of who within a function answers it, it's usually by account team, right? So whichever CSM is on that account will answer that question, or whichever of the two of us in the data solutions architects are kind of primary on that account will answer an end user question. So it's mostly by account team. And then within account team, it's sort of by nature of question. And so I think 95% of things are taken care of without us really having to communicate with each other and say like, oh, who's going to take this? Anything like that. It's just whoever is, appropriate will take it. Maybe 80%. And then I'll say 15%, the CSM, is kind of trying to have oversight and will say, oh, this is clearly a question for Melanie. And then they will actually assign it to me if I haven't looked and assigned it to myself yet. And then, yeah, there's only maybe like that kind of small 5 to 10% where we'll actually engage on the internal thread and say like, hey, who do you think should it be me? Should it be you? But that's all kind of within the account team usually.
That's very helpful. And that tends to be pretty common with most companies that we see using Thena and kind of how they engage with that. And for those that aren't familiar, there's a few different ways to take a request or a thread that's coming from a customer and assign it either to yourself or to others. So the first, you can turn on auto assign. Auto assign is on by default, where basically the first person that replies in that thread will get auto assign that ticket. So you might jump into a thread and you say, hey, I'm looking into this, or can you send me more details? That'll assign it to that first person that replies, and they can always reassign it to somebody else. The second is you can use a shortcut emoji. I don't know if you guys do this, Melanie, but you can use the shortcut, the shortcut kind of bar to say assign to, and then it'll pop up a modal and say, I can assign this to Melanie, I can assign this to Mike. And then the third is you can just click either the emoji directly on the thread, so eyeballs emoji, if you use the emojis, or you can, in the triage channel, there's also a button where you can just click assign to me or assign to somebody else, and then you can select who to assign it to. Do you have a favorite, or do you have one that you tend to use more or less?
Yeah, I was thinking about it as you were listing them out. We don't have the emoji turned on, like for in the customer channel. We sort of turned off that so that it's kind of invisible to them, right? What's happening. And so I would say the auto assign might be the most common. Like I'll just answer and then it's auto assigned me and that's it. But it's a close second with the looking into it button on the triage message. I think that's my other most common one. The sort of 3 dots menu is kind of less common. But the Kanban board, actually, I don't even know if you mentioned in the
Oh
Kanban
yeah, that's right.
um, I think that
Um,
one actually comes up into the list before, like since we have emoji turned off and before the three dots menu in the Kanban, as I'm looking at all of the unanswered ones and unassigned ones, I might assign it to myself there.
this has been game changing for us, even internally at Thena. So just the ability to assign a thread to somebody, because historically, even at branch before, we would maybe tag somebody in. You'd say, at Mike, can you look into this? Or at Mike is going to help look into this. And
Mhm.
then we would just hope that I actually see it and jump in. But I don't know, I might miss it. I might forget about it, to your point earlier, and having to make sure that you're following up with people. And instead being able to say, okay, I'm going to assign Mike or I'm going to assign Melanie to this. It's been amazing. And so even sometimes I'll jump in if I know, for example, one of our folks, maybe Sid or Jared, is busy. Also, I'll jump in and I'll say, hey, we'll take a look at this. Sid is going to follow up, and then it'll assign it to me, and then I'll reassign it to Sid.
Yeah,
And so I think that assignment feature is really killer.
I think so. And like I think at the reassignment stage in particular, like you alluded to, is really key for us because, the majority of the time it's sort of clear who's going to be the right person to answer and we just do it. But even though it's kind of a small percentage of the requests, they're usually kind of the beefier, maybe more important, more subtle ones where, I'll have to say, hey, like at Joe, um, do you know anything about this particular piece of this question? And I think kind of in the before times, you would just kind of guess or have to interpret each other's words. Like, do I want Joe to answer me and then I will take his answer to the customer? Do I want Joe to answer them directly because I don't know what's going on? And it's such a small communication thing internally, but I think having that explicit assignment, like really, kind of gives you some discipline there and some clarity on like, okay, am I just asking his advice or am I saying, please take this over from me?
I love that. It's so insightful. I think the analogy is, I remember, like I've had periods where for email, like you see this commonly in email, where there might be a group and nobody knows who's owning it, right? There's kind of this
Mhm.
diffusion of responsibility. And the reason that email-based ticketing systems like Zendesk are popular is, and have been effective, is because you can say, okay, I know that, Melanie is owning this ticket, where historically it would kind of be like a bit ambiguous, right? And the same thing has happened in this new platform of Slack and Teams.
Mhm.
Really fascinating. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, I want to touch on a few more things before we open up for additional Q&A. I want to talk about if you guys do any grooming. I want to talk about the data and how you use it. I want to talk about the benefits that you think customers see in terms of engaging with in Slack, and then want to also hit on any advice that you have for people. So, first question on this is, do you guys do any grooming? Do you guys do any like periodic review of the tickets, or is everyone currently just responsible for making sure that they're owning all of their tickets in Slack and the Thena web app, wherever, and you don't review them together? Tell us about that.
We don't currently have much of a kind of review mechanism. Every once in a while, we'll take a team meeting time and kind of go over it. Or one of us, like in the phase where we're looking for new things we need to assign to ourselves, we might notice something and ping someone else. Yeah, and it's actually worked out okay so far. I think we'll need maybe more of one, but also from my position, not as a CSM, like I think the CSMs maybe do a little bit more checking up on kind of the global state than I do. Right, I'm mostly looking at my own stuff. I think our sort of current realistic state is that like the CSMs are taking the brunt of the overall kind of review process.
Yep.
So
Cool.
they might have a different answer than I would for that question.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I see a split. Some teams will do a periodic review, some even daily, depending on their volume, and then some don't do it, and it'll be reliant on each individual. Let's talk a little bit about the data. And the data could be either the actual just like responsiveness data or the actual content data. Do you guys do anything, or do you ever look at the data, the summaries, the tags, or do you pull that data into any other systems currently? And if not, do you envision that at some point you would?
Yeah, so it's actually my counterpart is sort of our like internal analytics project like Tableau expert. And so she's made great use of the ability to just export the data and then feed it into our sort of other internal analytics stuff that eventually, feeds into Tableau. So we haven't done too much with it yet, I think, but we definitely kind of rely on that just export feature to then be able to tie it into all the rest of our analytics data.
Very cool. We're seeing more and more people take that data, put it into places like Tableau, put it into Snowflake, put it into their CRM, sometimes even a CSP, and start to do more with that stuff. And historically, it's been a black box, not having that data or anything related to what's going on in Slack. And now people are starting to port that in because it was a never before seen data point that now people can kind of encompass that and start to do more things on that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the benefits to the customer. You talked about the benefits to the Anomalo team, to yourself, but there's also benefits to the customer, I'd imagine. What's your take on and your thoughts on the benefits that customers get and see in being able to engage with you in multiple different channels, but notably Slack, which tends to be the most heavily used channel for you guys?
Yeah, I think for the customers that also kind of spend all day internally in Slack, kind of like we do, it's very similar benefits, right? Like they can interact with us, the vendor, without having to kind of like leave their normal ecosystem and, put in a ticket, put in an email when they don't really read their email. And so I think all the benefits that kind of we listed, like a very large fraction of them at least, go to the customers as well. Like obviously they're not seeing sort of assignment or like Kanbans or anything like that, but they are having that seamless experience of interacting with the vendor just sort of where they are normally. And so that sort of, I think, yeah, seamlessness of, where they're living in their workday and the ability of Slack to kind of support both synchronous and asynchronous communication, I think is really key. Like you can pretty easily slide between the two. Like if you happen to be online at the same time, and you can have that really quick back and forth in Slack, and make a lot of progress there without actually jumping on a call. Or you can have the slower burn threads where, someone replies the next day, someone replies a few hours later. And that's really good for interacting with like different time zone teams. So yeah, I think that flexibility is really key, because even if you're not getting the super instant response that people associate as like a benefit with Slack, I think you're still getting a lot of benefits overall.
One of the things I've seen, as you think about kind of like when it is a little bit more synchronous, when it is a little bit more real time, if you're there, if you're available, that I've seen is the ability to get people up and running sooner because their hands are on keyboard, they're doing the work at that moment. And if you can get them an answer to their question faster, sooner, they end up being able to maybe finish implementation and then get value sooner. Have you seen something similar when you've had those cases where you're kind of addressing issues real time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, right, this is a very small but very common interaction will be, someone asks a question at a customer, and then especially for the ones that we have Slack channels with, but we don't have access to their system directly, like their Anomalo system, we'll say, okay, can you give us some logs? Can you give us a screenshot of X? Even the ones where we do have access, if we just say, can you give us a link to the thing you're talking about, as opposed to just describing it, that initial interaction can go like so much quicker in Slack. And it can get you past kind of the initial startup of even just like engaging with them on troubleshooting. Like even if you don't get to the full resolution, like in that sort of quick in exchange, you can actually get to working on the problem much, much faster.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. I've seen just immense benefit because you're able to answer, get them working on the problem, and then often sometimes I see people they'll carve out time to do an implementation, and then if they're blocked, they'll move on to something else, and it might be a few days, maybe even a week, maybe even 2 weeks until they come back to it. And so I think especially for more technical tools like Anomalo, the faster you can get people answers and solutions, the faster they'll get up and running, the faster they'll have value, and then ultimately they'll be happier, hopefully, and get more value and stick around longer.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. In a few minutes, we're going to be switching over to any audience questions. So if there's anyone in the audience that has additional questions, feel free to drop them. There's a little Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom bar. Feel free to drop them in there. So Melanie, curious about Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit,
Mhm.
but what do you wish existed with Thena, with the way in which you're interacting with customers in Slack? What doesn't exist today, or that you're not using that you wish did exist?
Yeah, what would I wish for? Well, right. I have some of my top of mind feature requests that I've already told you I've wished for. I'm gonna try to think out the box a little bit. I think I would wish for sort of the customer Thena dashboard of some kind. So like when we were talking about what benefits the customers get out of Thena, like one thing that they're not seeing is just a list of all of their threads that are considered open, right? Like they might get a little lost if they've asked us 5 questions, trying to remember which ones they still want to follow up on. Um, so yeah, I think that would be my one big wish is like some way for the customer to log in and get their own little Thena. I don't know if it's Kanban, I don't know exactly what it looks like, but their own sort of list of Slack stuff.
And we've talked about that with Melissa, and I think something will be coming. So that's great. That's a good one. Good that that's already on the radar.
Mhm.
Okay, any other advice that you'd have for folks within the context of anything we've chatted about, or even kind of beyond that, as they think about maybe if they're doing Slack with customers, but they don't quite know how to like navigate the chaos?
Yeah, I think the among the stuff we've talked about, the stuff that I think is the most like valuable or kind of critical for us to not lose our minds has been the kind of like centralizing that, CS to engineering or product handoff. Like once we reached a certain scale, like that was really, really important to have a defined process so that we're not just each doing a different thing. Like, maybe one of us goes into the engineering team's internal team channel and says, hey, I need help with X. Or maybe, someone else just at messages them in the customer channel or in the internal customer triage channel and says like, hey, I think that has been absolutely key. Within sort of CS, I would say don't follow our example and kind of say, oh, like the kind of review process is fine. Like we'll just all be responsible for our own stuff. We've done okay with it, but I think we've done a couple of ad hoc review exercises, and maybe the key thing there is that we've realized we are doing okay, right? Like there weren't a ton of things slipping through the cracks. But in the early setup days, I think that wasn't true. Like I think we, just setting up Thena for each channel is easy, but it's easy to miss a channel maybe so that you forgot that you haven't configured Thena on customer X. And then all of a sudden you realize that no one's paying attention to customer X. Like, yeah, I would say in the early days, especially just put eyeballs on making sure that everything is actually showing up to you in the place that you expect it to.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I'm going to integrate that with a question from the crowd, which is around kind of the process for learning from the tickets and from the requests that are coming in. And I'm curious about if you guys and how you guys have kind of started to learn from the data, whether that be when you're doing that review in the Kanban and you realize, oh, there's a trend here, or getting the data out into other systems. Anything that you can share there in order to kind of just improve internally what you think the team, whether it be the product team, the engineering team, should be focusing on. Any insights there?
Yeah. So to be honest, we don't really have this process wise established. Right now we're a small enough team. There's kind of only at most 2 of us essentially in each role in customer success. So we will usually just kind of be synthesizing kind of in our own heads, and then we'll talk to the product team, and it's still a little bit organic that way. We'll just say, okay, what things have I remembered, have stuck out in my mind? But we have high hopes for doing that sort of data export that I was talking about, feeding it into our other analytics, joining it with all the other data for our customers, and using the tags specifically. So they're sort of the AI tags. And I think we've maybe talked about, whether it makes sense to be able to do human tags kind of, mixed in there. But yeah, we have high hopes for those. And that's kind of what we're working towards with extracting the data and putting it into kind of our other analytics, is doing exactly that analysis, maybe on some kind of regular cadence, or having a dashboard or something that we can reference.
Yeah, I think that's right on. It's spot on in what I've seen a number of folks do, and I think you guys are moving this direction. And for those that aren't familiar, within Thena, we'll use AI to summarize the entire thread, as including the resolution. We'll use AI to automatically apply tagging to the actual request. So if somebody has an issue with a certain product and it's a bug, we'll tag that with bug for the specific product. And then you can also do individual manual tags or custom fields, and people will export that and then either view it on the dashboard or export it into a different system, and they'll summarize it. And some really cool things happening there, especially when AI summarizes everything that happened over the last month. That's a really interesting analysis that then people can use that to see what the trends are. And so I think that's spot on. I think you guys are moving in a really healthy direction there as well. Okay, and then Hans here, let's see, asked a question around, does the Thena roadmap have any kind of expansion of the Kanban flow, like adding additional or custom stages? Indeed. So what we see some people do today is they'll add stages via tags, via the manual custom fields, but we're also adding additional functionality for the different stages, including things like waiting on customer, blocked internally, et cetera, to kind of differentiate between things. Like right now, you'd mentioned this, Melanie, you guys use the on hold category for sometimes things that are long-standing or maybe blocked internally. And so we're going to break that apart to be able to say, okay, this is something waiting on customer versus this is something that's waiting internally. Maybe engineering needs to do some work there.
Well, my other wish list item that I was like, this is too boring, was sort of the ability to automatically, in the flow, have something go from on hold back to in progress if the customer responds.
Yeah, so waiting on customer. It's coming, waiting on customer, and if they reply, moving that to back to in progress. I think that's spot on. Really great feedback, really great feature request. Wonderful. So Melanie, any final thoughts, any final suggestions that you have for folks, or final insights that you want to leave people with?
I feel like I should have something very insightful prepared, but I think I actually covered all of my main ones. Yeah, basically, don't take for granted that you remembered to click all of the buttons when you're initially setting everything up. Because yeah, it's so valuable to have all of the Slack threads kind of presented this way. Like I 100% rely on it now that it's in the workflow. And so if there's any channel where Thena is not doing it, like I will be guaranteed to miss stuff, because it's just that much easier to manage, in the Thena Kanban way.
Wonderful. And I have to give kudos to you and to the Anomalo team, because you all have done an exceptional job setting up your customer channels, managing your customers really effectively, using the workflows really strategically, and you see the benefit. And hopefully this will continue to allow you to scale offering that level of support and service and collaboration externally, internally, as you guys continue to grow. So thrilled to have you as a partner, and really excited to watch you all grow, and hopefully we can help you as you scale.
Yeah, awesome.
Wonderful. Melanie, really appreciate it. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the insights. And where can people go if they need data quality monitoring solutions?
Anomalo.com.
Perfect. I love it.
Our main page. Yeah, go there, click the links, and someone will definitely get in touch with you.
Say that Melanie referred you, so you can get some sort of referral credit.
Exactly.
Love it. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. Melanie, you can stick around for a minute, but appreciate everyone's time. And for those that are online, we will be sending out the recording. So Melanie, really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Take care.